Hello everyone, my name is Fahed Rahman and this is See Through Panel, a podcast where we review graphic novels and talk to the people that make them. Today I've got a special guest co-host, it's Jon Schwochert. He is an artist and illustrator working in both traditional and digital media with a passion for storytelling. His work has been used in video games, magazines, public artworks, but most often he creates comic books and graphic novels. He's currently based in the southeast of England, taking freelance commissions while teaching 2D art to game design students at Canterbury Christ Church University and conducting youth outreach work for the Kent and Medway Collaborative Outreach Programme. How are you doing, Jon?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's really good to have you on again to talk about a graphic novel. Before we get into the book that we're going to be talking about, are there any other comic books that you've been reading recently that you'd like the folks to know about?
Oh, yeah. What did I just pick up recently? Came out a few years ago. It was one of Mobius's last comics. He did it with Jodorowsky.
It wasn't the Inkle, was it?
Yes, it
He
was
did,
the Inkle.
yeah,
That was the
yeah,
name of
yeah.
it. Yeah,
That's fantastic,
yeah.
fantastic.
That was. I really enjoyed that. I gotta get the next editions.
It's surprising how many other people have just completely wholesale nicked ideas and aesthetics from that comic book. It's just like unbelievable,
But
really.
I guess that's what happens when you're just a groundbreaking artist. I mean, you set what is the new visual language. You set the new trends. You set the visual ideas and things that people reference from that
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, and talking about groundbreaking artists and writer, let's get into the graphic novel that we're going to be talking about today. It is Destroy All Monsters, a Reckless book. It is by Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, and Jacob Phillips. The blurb reads as follows. It's 1988 and Ethan has been hired for his strangest case yet, finding the secrets of a Los Angeles real estate mogul. How hard could that be, right? I mean, what starts as a deep dive into the life of a stranger will soon take a deadly turn, and Ethan finds himself risking everything for those who matter to him. This is an Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips book.
Mhm.
They've written some of my favorite comics of the past few years. I don't know how you feel kind of generally about that team.
This is my first time reading something by them. So who's the artist, and who's the writer?
So Ed Brubaker is the author. He's most famous for writing graphic noir
Okay.
comic books, and Sean Phillips is his frequent collaborator. I think they're more famous for working on Criminal. That's their other big.
Oh yeah, okay. I read Criminal. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so they're most that's the kind of what they're most famous for. And Ed Brubaker is also really well known for writing some of the most important Captain America comics of kind of like recent times as well. So they're a really well established kind of film noir, well, comic book noir team.
Okay. And I wanted to ask too, Sean Phillips, did he do all the art, or was there separate colorists, separate
Yeah,
inkers?
yeah. So that's an excellent question. So Sean Phillips, from what I can tell, he did the penciling and inking, and his brother Jacob did the coloring.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's how they split the artistic duties. I'm not too sure who did the penciling. I don't think that's mentioned. I couldn't find where if there's a separate person that did that. So I'm assuming either Ed, Sean, or Jacob did the coloring on that one.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so let's just kind of start with your basic impressions and thoughts.
I,
Think
I
about.
I really enjoyed the book. It's really well written. The story flows really well. It's believable at the same time being exciting. I mean, yeah, it's overall just a really good book. I would recommend picking this one up.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of chose this to talk to you about because you like crime comic books.
I
So I
do.
thought this, I thought this would be
Yeah.
kind of like straight down your alley. This is, I think, maybe the third or second book in like the Reckless series. So it's the Reckless series follows the adventures or misadventures of Ethan Reckless. He's a private investigator in Los Angeles. It's kind of a period piece, most of the
Mhm.
action taking place in kind of the 1970s and 1980s.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Ethan's kind of this prototypical hard man private investigator with kind of his sidekick Anna, who's this punk rock film nerd as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about, because you kind of mentioned the coloring. I really loved the coloring on this. I thought it was like fantastic. So I just, maybe you want to talk a little bit
Yeah, I mean, the
about that.
color palettes are beautiful. Like every page is really Well, I mean, for the most part, well designed. There's a few little like nitpicking things I could talk about, but the color palettes that they're using, I mean, give a feel of the different scenes that you're in. Every time you're changing setting, there's a change in palette. Palettes are also reflecting the mood, and I mean, they're just really rich and really well designed. And one thing that's great about the whole feel of the book too, and then the palettes are a big part of this, is it just has a feel of that kind of just trashy side of LA. So I lived in LA for 2 years, and I lived in some of the areas that they're drawing, and it's just got that like trashy strip mall, like kind of want to be suburban, but just kind of junk feel to it. And no, I mean, they just capture the aesthetic of it really well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The other thing that I felt that the coloring did as well, it kind of the coloring handles a lot of the detail work. I felt
Mm.
so it kind of gives a real richness and depth to all the images on the page.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the art making in here is really beautiful, not just with the coloring, but also with the line work. It all kind of flows and works together. So it makes sense that the artist is working with his brother, and they've got a whole team where they've collaborated a lot, and that's why it's as tight as it is. But there's a real sense of tool making in the way they make the art, and I really like that. There's one thing that I feel like just kind of missing or kind of let down by a lot of times with digital comic books that are made digitally is everything's just made a bit too clean and a bit more polished, and you sort of lose that connection with the artist. So I like how they've included this sort of like roughness and this handmade quality to so much of what they did.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you about, well, there's two questions out of it that what you just said I wanted to kind of ask you about. So do you think this was inked, colored digitally? Because I felt that like you don't usually get these results with digital coloring. Usually it's you only get this sort of thing with when it's colored analog. Why? So you
Oh,
think it
okay.
was, yeah, do you think it was colored digitally?
I'm 99% sure it was. So I think they're using a really textured brush in Photoshop, and
Okay.
they're just letting that brush show through. So you can do, I mean, you can download brushes that have a certain texture to them, or you can make your own. You could like make a little ink splodge and scan it in, and then up the contrast on it, and then capture that and use that itself as a brush in yeah, in Photoshop, and it just gives that sort of rawness and that roughness to it.
Yeah. So you mentioned tool making there. So that is that what you mean by tool making? Actually going in and creating your own brushes in
Yeah,
Photoshop
stuff
or
like
whatever.
that, or sometimes they just let the line work be a little bit ugly, like in the big expansive like scenes where you can see the cityscape. What I expect to see in most comic books now is people making using the tools of Photoshop just to make really straight, perfect lines. But they didn't so much. They let the sort of hand drawn qualities of their lines show. So it looked like they were doing the architectural drawings just freehand. And then you get that sort of waviness in the lines, and that's where you see the touch of the artist. And that also matched well with the story because in a way, it helps that aesthetic helps communicate the roughness of the place that they are.
Both the Phillipses, they've got a really good way of balancing, just giving enough detail to the images. So it's not, especially with the line work, there's just enough detail to give you a sense of the story. It doesn't kind of overwhelm
Mm,
the page, and his choice of choosing thick lines to thin lines, and the use of shadow as well in the inking, I felt was really impressive.
mm.
His choice of whether or not to show the colors of the character's eyes, or whether the character's eyes should be bathed in shadow, how much detail we kind of see on the characters' faces as well, is they almost always perfectly judge when to give lots of details and when to just to leave it a little bit sparse.
There's something I really like too that they do with the backgrounds. So sometimes they just a quite plain or blank background when they want you to focus on the characters. But what they do with that is they just put some quite loose brush strokes or paint marks in there, just a slight shift in tone, just so that there is something kind of behind the characters grounding them. The rest of the color palette of the scene, but yeah, it just sits nicely and flows.
You did mention there was a couple of nitpicking things, so do you want to get into that a little bit, because it's
Yeah,
always,
yeah.
yeah.
So one is actually how they're using shadow. So I'm glad you brought that up. There's some places where I think it could have been a bit better thought out and a bit better planned. So they're going for this crime noir aesthetic, so they're bringing a lot of shadows in there, and that helps give that sort of like dark, mysterious, edgy feel to it. So I get they're bringing a lot of shadows in the face, but there's some points where they're out of place. where it's not working with the rest of the light logic of the scene, and it just looks a little bit rough. So, for example, they'll be in a daylight scene, and they'll just have shoved some shadows on the front of the character's face. And actually, they could have placed them in slightly better areas. And one thing that I noticed is they're almost always, in order to get that shadow in their artwork, they're almost always using form shadow. So shadow that's on the form that we're looking at. So for example, shadow on the person, rather than using cast shadows. So if you're in a room with strong light, you're casting shadows on other objects around you. And they could have played with that a little bit more to get that darkness. And I think it would have had a bit more of a natural feel.
That's kind of one of the issues of setting a story in LA, which is
Yeah.
whatever else you can say about it, it's kind of a bright, sunny place. So it's kind of playing around with getting that noir aesthetic with the the bright sunlight that you get in California.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something there, like you mentioned, there is something a little bit trashy about LA as well. So it's not that bad a setting for a noir story.
Sure. I mean, some of the greatest noir stories have been set in LA, like Chinatown.
Yeah,
That's a
exactly.
classic. There was something else. I've noticed this a bit with Image Comics. I'm guessing Image has like a set lettering team or team that goes over the final pass of the comic that they always use, because I always see these sort of stylistic choices in every comic that they do. But there's always like a real contrast between the whites that they put in their word bubbles and some of their titles and their backgrounds, and it doesn't always match up with the rest of the artwork.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't noticed that.
So, I mean, they do really cool stuff with their panel layout that I really enjoy. Like sometimes they butt their word bubbles right up to the edge of the panel, and they don't put a border on the panel, so the dead color in between the panels then bleeds into the word bubble. And I think those are really cool design elements. But in a lot of these panels, and this shows really clearly in this crime noir comic, is you've got this like dark, beautiful color palette going on. You've got these shadows moving across, but then you just got this stark white background. And it seems to me they've kind of missed an opportunity. They could go with something instead of that stark white in their word bubbles and the space between the panels in the gutters. They could go with something just like a little bit off white that just
Yeah.
doesn't create that jarringness that really pulls you away, from the kind of narrative in the visual world that they've built.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. Yeah, kind of playing around with the colors of speech bubbles, word bubbles. It can create some really interesting effects on the readers. Kind of one of our, mine and Cole's favorite comics last year was Titan by Francois Vigneault, and he played around with the color of his word bubbles a
Hmm.
lot. So he did something where he would accent certain bits of text in the speech bubble would be in a different color, and that's something they could have maybe played around here as well. Kind of, I'm especially kind of thinking about the bits where someone's been hit in the head or they've been drugged or something.
Mm-hmm.
If you just play around with the color of the word bubble there, just to kind of add to the fact that they're not completely in control of their faculties, I think would have
Mm-hmm.
been a nice choice. So let's talk a little bit about the plot. So I think for me the kind of the main themes that run through the book nails it on the head, kind of in the opening line when Ethan mentions 1988 is the year that I started feeling old, and there's this
Mm-hmm.
theme of him starting to feel his age, the injuries catching up with him, and the fact that the world is changing and moving on, and perhaps he's not really comfortable with that, and he's got this father-daughter relationship with Anna, and Anna's starting to grow up and meeting new people and maybe deciding she wants to follow a different path that will maybe lead her away from Ethan. So it's those themes of getting old, children moving away, even though technically Anna and Ethan aren't father daughter. There's still that very much kind of father daughter dynamic between them, and
Mm-hmm.
your children moving away and maybe losing a step as you get older as well. So I don't know if you picked up on those themes as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they add a sort of richness and a background to the characters as this whole narrative is unfolding. Yeah, it just gives a really nice depth to it. But there's also the awkwardness of her being a young woman and him not being her dad, and there's almost like a subcontext like, ooh, am I doing this out of a parental thing, or is there sort of an attraction or a jealousy or
Yeah, I think especially with some of the way he treats some of her significant others, there is I couldn't quite tell if that was like an attraction thing. I don't think it was. I just think he's got a very low tolerance for idiots.
Mm,
Like this Dimitri character, who's Anna's latest boyfriend, doesn't seem like a great catch, to be
yeah.
honest with you. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, also, I don't want to give away any spoilers to anyone listening who hasn't read this yet. But there's with the boyfriends, there's a few red herrings that are thrown out there too about where the narrative goes. There's a few little details that were given about boyfriends. I'm like, ooh, does that tie into the plot somehow? And some things do, some things don't.
it's good that you mentioned that, because one of the things that Ed Brubaker is really good at doing is like keeping you guessing
Mm-hmm.
as what's gonna happen next and where the plot is going to go. If you've read other Reckless books, he does kind of hit a few beats that have been in previous not previous Reckless books. So I'm especially thinking about the sex orgies. That's something that's been in a few Reckless books.
Right.
But if you're writing a noir set in LA, I don't think you can really avoid kind of sex orgies.
Or
Unfortunately, I think
if you're ever drawing a blank, you hit writer's block, you don't know what to do, just throw sex orgy in
yeah,
there. It'll
yes,
get the plot moving.
yeah. So there's sex orgies, there's blackmail, there's corrupt cops and
Hmm.
politicians. I think one of the interesting things that was new to this particular book were the kind of the themes of racism and
Mm.
how that's kind of hit the development of not just LA but kind of like American cities in general. So I think the plot is basically kicks off when Ethan takes on a job from a local politician by the name of, and I did write his name down, Isaac Presley. And basically, Presley wants Ethan's help in destroying the reputation of a man that betrayed his father. And it's kind of a complicated real estate deal that the details don't matter that much. All you know is that there's this white man that's basically betrayed the black community, and
Yeah.
Isaac Presley's a black African American community leader, and he basically wants revenge. I felt that those themes were quite well established. I think the geography of LA plays quite a big part in the story generally. How did you? I mean, you mentioned you lived out there for a
Mhm.
few years. Kind of what is the geography like out there? Is it kind of still kind of quite racially segregated, or what does it work? How does it work out there?
Not so much. I mean, not compared to where I grew up. I grew up in Milwaukee, which is the most segregated city in the States. I mean, compared to, I think, some UK cities. Apologies if you hear the Robert in the background. He's saying hello. He's got his opinions too. um,
Yeah, he does.
um, no, I mean, I guess like compared to cities like London and yeah, where I live now, yeah, it's definitely segregated. But compared to some other U.S. cities, it's not as bad. But like one thing I liked about it is as I looked into corruption, it also picked up on like the sort of small time sleaze that exists in it, and sort of just the patheticness of it as well, and just yeah, just the sort of low life scumminess of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's true. It's kind of how local politicians are important. They do make really like key decisions that affect a lot of people's lives, and just the sleaze of some of the politicians that are kind of we come across here. I think there's one particular character that they managed to not giving away too many spoilers, but there's one character that Ethan manages to blackmail in order to get some information, and he's just this kind of like sad sack looking guy that's just abused his position of authority.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I just felt, oh, I wish something really bad
Yeah.
happened to him.
I wanted to ask you how you felt about the setting because you read out the blurb at the start of the podcast, but the PDF that I got didn't have any blurb, so I just started reading the story,
Yeah.
and I had to progress. I had to realize as the story progressed that it was set in L.A. And yeah, I figured it out by the way things were drawn, and there's a lot of mentioning of freeways, which
Yes.
might sound weird if you never lived in LA, but they're very important in LA, right? So how did you feel about getting this sort of very detailed information about a place that might not the importance of which might not be recognized from people who
Yeah.
don't
So I think like the stuff about freeways in LA, I didn't really fully understand
Mm,
what the importance of that was. I know there's kind of one big panel, well, a few pages where Anna might be deciding to move away, and Ethan's going through like what the consequences of what that will mean. Basically, if she
Mhm.
moves on the other side of this freeway, basically they're never going to see each other again because it's like, like a 4-hour drive each
Yeah.
way. I do know, like, just through popular culture, like, I know traffic in LA is quite bad. It's really
Yeah.
difficult to get anywhere. Kind of, if
Mhm.
you want to get to a journey that's like maybe 2 miles away, it's going to take you an hour, depending on what route you take. Because I've read previous Reckless books, I did know that it was set in LA, and so it wasn't too much of a surprise for me that way. But
Okay.
it's one of those curious things where like the city plays a really important part as a character,
Mhm.
because that stuff of about Anna moving across the freeway, that wouldn't really that matters because of the geography of the place.
So let me ask you: you get this sometimes in stories. It's almost like the setting is a character.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that was the case in this comic?
Yes, I did, and I say that for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that Ethan's home base is a theater, and
Mhm.
you really get that it's a bit of an odd place as a home base for a private investigator. It's kind of it's a little out of everything. This book isn't too quirky, but that is quite a quirky choice
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
for Brubaker to take. The other thing is there's like a corrupt police officer in this, and the style of corruptness I felt was a very LA style of
Okay.
corruptness. So I think there's like an LA vibe that runs through all the characters, and
Mm.
you can see definitely get a sense of how the place has influenced the way that people behave.
Yeah. There was. I was wondering too. Like, as they were writing it, are the writers and the artists and the editors and the whole team of people involved, are they so West Coast based and so involved in LA that they don't know how to talk about LA to people who aren't from there or have never been there? Like it almost seemed to me like this comic was meant to be sold to people who lived in LA.
Okay,
You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I understand that, actually, yeah. I have no idea where Ed Brubaker and the Phillipses are based. I kind of always assume because of their work on Criminal that it'd be more East Coast than West Coast.
Oh,
Because
okay.
like Criminal, correct me if I'm wrong, you maybe know better than my than I do. I always got the impression that like Criminal was always set in like the kind of East Coast cities, kind of, or at the very most, kind of like the Midwest, now places like Chicago and that sort of
Yeah, it
thing.
had an
Yeah,
industrial vibe to it. I can't.
yeah.
I'd have to open it up and have a look at it again.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of, you're mentioning the industrial vibe, which just going back to the coloring in this, there is kind of a washed out color. Yeah, especially in the daytime scenes, there's this kind of washed out coloring that you kind of gives you impression that it's kind of based somewhere solid. I'm looking just
Yeah.
at this, the first case that they've taken. No case too small. Is the it's
Mhm,
about
mhm, mhm.
the people that finding some turds in their mailbox,
Yeah.
and just kind of like the washed out kind of like greens that they're using in the story there, I think are really kind of really do give you a sense that this is like in a sunny place, kind of the West Coast, or maybe further south in the United States
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. So who was your just getting back to the characters, who were your kind of favorite characters in the book?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the only ones we really get to explore in depth, I guess, were the two main characters. The rest of them were all kind of on the periphery, and they sort of just sort of facilitate the two main characters' journey.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it is definitely about the journey that both Anna and Ethan go on, just in terms of his realization that the world is changing. Anna is growing up, and Anna realizing maybe she doesn't want to be the sidekick of an aging PI for the rest of her life, and maybe there
Mm.
is a little bit more out there for her, even if that might mean making mistakes, or moving away. I kind of quite liked the Isaac Presley. He's the only other character that we get to spend any significant amount of time with, so we get a really good idea of what his motivations are, what is and isn't important to him, in terms of why he makes certain decisions in the book. And while we might not agree or like some of the decisions he makes, we certainly do
Well,
understand why he makes them.
no, I don't know. I was fine with his decisions. I thought they were all right. And I thought the main character kind of came to terms with them.
Yeah, he did. He definitely did come to terms with them, but
Yeah.
it did kind of like put him in a slightly sticky
Sure. Yeah.
situation. So I think he was kind of like, deed. I thought we was going one way. If you decided to
Yep.
maybe
But
go
there's
another
also
way.
like a miscommunication in that,
Yeah.
and yeah, he tried to do it right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I felt I kind of quite liked his character. Well, not like, but I kind of you kind of got on board with what he was trying to talk about. So we've been chatting for about 30 minutes about the book. Is there
Mhm.
anything else that we've not mentioned that you think we should probably cover?
No, those are the main themes, but I think like it's a book which has a story which is quite relevant to a lot of the realizations people are having now. Like,
Yes, it is
yes,
quite prescient, isn't it?
yeah, not just race, but also just understanding like how much impact down the line like the development of a city can have. Like what happens when you destroy a neighborhood or don't allow local businesses to flourish, or what happens when someone how someone's greed can impact an entire city.
Yeah, it's kind of like LA has got a really rich history of making bad real estate decisions that because they used to have like a tram lines and great like train networks in LA, and then
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ford Motor Company said, well, we want to sell more cars, let's kind of like get rid of all of that, and how the greed of the insatiable appetite of capitalism and prioritizing money and GDP above
Mhm.
all else, above other things that you can't necessarily put a price on, like communities and neighborhoods and things like that.
They did it in a way that works too, because a lot of times I see in film or books, you try to tell these stories, and when, as you're telling a narrative, a lot of times you have to put an individual character or an individual face to a problem.
Yeah,
So you see this a lot in like the sort of like American kind of the poor. Not all of these movies are poorly done, but the ones who are more poorly done,
yeah,
like it'll be a movie about, I don't know, segregation in the South, and it'll just be one bad cop,
yeah,
right? Because that's how you tell the narrative, right? The
yeah,
one bad cop is racism, right? But then it also gives like a false narrative. It's not a problem of one bad cop. It's a whole societal problem. But as the story, the way they wrote this story, okay, they did have this one bad greedy developer, but they didn't do it in a way that cheapened our understanding of what's happening.
yeah, yeah. Because the one bad cop is just a tool of a wider system. He's a symptom of a wider systemic corruption, which is it really comes across clearly in this.
Yeah, and
So
yeah, and then we see the people on his periphery, and yeah, we know he's just one developer, and there's
yeah.
other nasty real estate developers too.
I find myself mentioning the Grenfell inquiry in almost every podcast that I find myself doing these days. But it's just you mentioned kind of how the development of a city can detrimentally impact the citizens and people that live there. And I think what happened in Grenfell is a perfect example of corruption, criminal
Mm,
intent, incompetence, prioritizing maybe for wrong things. And
yeah.
that also really comes across in Destroy All Monsters as well. I really enjoyed this. It's like a firm recommendation from me. I think Brubaker and the Phillipses have done superb work on this, and I believe the trade paperback is going to be out sometime in October. I'm not too sure when the release date is
Okay.
in the UK, but yeah, what are your any closing thoughts on that, John?
Closing thoughts is I wanted to start reading the other books in the series now. This is excellent.
They're really good. Well, I've only read one other book, but I really enjoyed reading that. So let's have a little bit of a catch up chat. What have you been up to recently, John?
Oh, I've been up to too much. Yeah, outside of everything going on in my personal life,
Yeah.
having a son, a house I'm renovating, having a crazy dog who terrorizes the mailman. Uh, no, I had a quite busy summer, so I do still take the odd freelance commission outside of my teaching work at Canterbury Christ Church. And I had a couple commissions that came up at the beginning of the summer, and or a couple opportunities for commissions. So I sent my name out to all of them, and this very strange and horrible thing happened. Everyone said yes. So I got all this work at the summer, which isn't the worst problem to have. But when the work piles on, you start to get overloaded. and
Yeah.
then you start to work less well, and then the work piles up more, and then you get more stressed out, and then you produce less quality things. So yeah, it's been a busy summer, but I did do some cool projects. I started working with the Electric Medway Festival. It's a festival of electronic arts in the Medway area. So that's an area in Kent in the southeast of England for anyone outside of the UK who's listening. So I did an animation about the history of Rochester and Chatham, which is just really simple drawings, and then we projected it on a wall, and people going to a film screening on the way in and out would sort of see this ambient history of Rochester projected in an animation. So that was a bit of fun.
And you're teaching at Canterbury Christ Church University. How's that going in terms of teaching 2D art? Is it you're teaching it to game design students? How are they finding all that stuff?
It's great. So it's basically it was my dream job, and I'm doing it now. So I'm really enjoying it. I'm going into my second year of teaching there. So now I get to go back through all my old lesson plans and revise things, throw out what didn't work, tighten up things that did. It's quite cool. The games design major we have there it's a generalist games design major. So it's not just video games; it's also board games, card games, experimental arcade stuff. We really try to get our students to think very creatively about what is play and make something new. And students come in from a lot of different backgrounds. So I'm teaching art to not only students who want to work on the art side of games, but also ones who might be coming from the programming side or the narrative side or design side. So what I get to do then is work a lot on fundamentals. And I've got this interesting challenge that I'm often faced with is how do I make someone who is hardworking and engaged, but not necessarily an artist, good at art? And it's great. It really makes me break down the fundamentals. And last year I was really happy, got a couple students who weren't artists who ended up producing some of the best art in their class.
That's really the game design program there sounds really, really interesting. Kind of, I know, especially board games at the moment are quite
Mm-hmm,
massive,
mm-hmm.
and designing good board game art is really important to how successful a board game. So I've recently started listening to a board game podcast. I don't play many board games myself, but I do enjoy listening to people who are passionate about their hobbies talk
Mm-hmm.
about them. So it's called the Dicebreaker podcast, and
Oh, cool.
they quite often mentioned how important good art
Yeah.
is in terms of like getting you involved in the game, and how kind of bad art can kind of make a game that's got really good fundamental game mechanics a little bit unpleasant to
Okay.
interact with. So it's quite good that you're teaching that they're kind of teaching board game and kind of not just video game mechanics on the course. And having taught a little bit myself, martial arts,
Sure.
kind of teaching does make you a better practitioner sometimes, because you have to
Yes.
really think carefully about, all right, okay, I'm doing this thing, but why am I doing it, and how am I doing it, and how can I communicate that to someone
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't understand any of that
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's true with everything. Yeah. When I started coaching kickboxing, yeah, that made me a better kickboxer for sure.
Are you, yeah, outside of the work that you've done on the festival, have you got, I know you've got so much on at the moment. You kind of, for
Part
those
of
of you
my
who don't know,
life.
John,
The amount of times my wife said to me, "I think you need to settle down a little bit before you burn
yeah,
out," and
yeah,
she's
I
right. She's
think
100% right.
John's kind of like, I don't know if you're halfway through or just partway through renovating your house, and it seems to me that you're doing a lot of the work
Yep. Yeah.
yourself, as well as kind of your teaching work and raising a family. I've interviewed a couple of freelancers recently, and one of the questions I've been asking them is kind of, how do they balance everything? So how are you balancing
Well, I
everything
kind
at
of
the
don't.
moment?
I'm really bad at that. I mean, I've slowly gotten a little bit better at it. But I mean, one of the main things I do is try to schedule things. So Sunday is a family day, always, and then try to set a 9 to 5 work ethic, which I'm not great at. It's also
Yeah.
helpful that my son sleeps well and is quite young. He's a year old, so he goes down to bed at 7, and then he's out till 6. So that means I get a couple hours in the evening to work if I need to.
Yeah, one of the comic books creators I've spoken to recently, well, a few of them said, when you work, I know you've got like a 9 to 5 job already, but if you're creating art as a freelancer, kind of setting those office
Mhm.
hours is quite important. And you just, time comes, 6 o'clock. All right, I'm done working for today, because you do need that time to let ideas percolate.
Yeah, and
And
you need to
yeah,
you
yeah,
need to rest well, and that's something which I try to communicate to my students, and I try to practice a lot. Is um, if you need to rest, put down your computer or whatever it is and step away, like properly step away and enjoy yourself. Don't kind of half-ass it. I'm a dick about on my phone for 5 minutes and look at Facebook, because that just builds anxiety and it doesn't refresh you at all.
Yeah, I had a really interesting chat with a freelance graphic designer, and one of the things he does is he still works kind of like 9 to 5, but what he'll do is he basically only works on his iPad now. Well, most of the time he works on his iPad tablet device, and he'll take his tablet device, go out to the park or a coffee
Okay.
shop, and he'll do his work there. And most of the other artists that I've spoken to find that idea like really tricky to deal with, because they need their tools, they need their tech set
Okay.
up,
That's
and
interesting.
everything else, and all of that stuff. So you meant, well, in my introduction to you, you kind of I read out that you were doing youth outreach work with the Kent and Medway
Yes.
Collaborative Outreach Program. Do you want to talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
okay.
that?
So there's something called the National Collaborative Outreach Program in the UK, and what they do is they look at students who have or they look at populations which have low representation in higher education. So they look at what sort of demographics that is, what areas they come from, and they identify basically postcodes, or if you're not from the UK, that'd be the same as a zip code. Locations in the UK which have a low proportion of students that are going on to university. And what it comes down to is it's mainly working class youth, and especially from very poor rural areas. And this CAMCOP is the Kent and Medway Collaborative Outreach Program. So there's a number of, under the national program, there's different regional bodies that take care of it. So I work with this regional body in my locality, CAMCOP. And basically, what we do is we do these workshops. We go to schools, community centers, churches, festivals, whoever will have us, and we try to do things to get the young people from that area to go to university. So that could be giving them some skills or some tools, but a lot of times it's just about breaking down barriers and building confidence and self-respect in these.
Were you doing that? So yeah, were you doing that during kind of lockdown? How were you running the workshops and stuff like that? Was it mostly
Yeah,
remote,
yeah. So
or is that something
yeah,
that,
so
yeah?
the team I
Go ahead.
work with, I'm lucky they're really good with remote stuff. I heard a lot of different university teaching outreach teams broke down across the country during lockdown. But the teams that I worked with CamCop were shit hot. Basically, they had their act together. So we would do a lot of remote video sessions, video calls. So I would do things like I would give an online video demonstration in the morning, and I'd come back after lunch. I'd say to the students, "Cool, show me what you did in the past couple hours," and they'd have made different animations and things. So we found like animation programs they could use on their phones to create stop motion animation with stuff around their house. A lot of times we'd have to mail them material packs before the sessions would start. And it is quite difficult too, because you're dealing with kids in really like extreme poverty that a lot of people don't realize exists in the first world. So a lot of times entire families are sharing a mobile phone, and that's how the kids are doing their schoolwork. That's how the parents are doing whatever online things they need to do, taxes and whatever else. That was something we found was a huge problem during lockdown, is access to the digital world for people in these communities. I mean, imagine that the whole family shares one smartphone. How are you going to get to all your online classes if you've got two or three kids in different years?
What sort of age groups were you working with
So I tend to work
on those
with like
programs?
12 to 17, sometimes a little bit older, sometimes up to early 20s.
Yeah, that's really good stuff, John. I know you're quite
Mhm.
public minded, and it's great that you're working on those projects. So kind of outside of your work and rebuilding a house and setting the world right, are you working on any interesting creative projects
Yeah,
just for
yeah, I am.
yourself?
So before my son was born, I was thinking that I wanted to do a couple comics that will be projects which are a bit more mine, and I feel like I've got good enough understanding of the industry and my skill and the rest of it, where I can do my own project and make it something which is good enough to send to publishers and sell and so on. Normally, I would collaborate with people like yourself. We did a comic book together.
Yeah.
So I've got two comics I want to work on. And before my son was born, what I did is I just sat down for a day and I just wrote everything that was in my head about those comics. And it's, big, sloppy couple word documents with like half figured out character descriptions, settings, the plots mostly figured out, and so on. And then I saved them and locked them away and said, I'll get to it when I get to it. And now, after the summer of craziness, I'm finally getting a little bit of time to get to it. And I'm starting to do some character sketches for those comics.
Any details that you can leak out
The
to
second
us,
one,
or is it
I'll
all
give you
kind
no
of like
details on, because I think it's a quite unique idea.
yeah
Keep that one to
yeah
myself.
yeah
But no, the first one is it's gonna the working title right now is The Fighter, and I should have had the sheet ready. I had a nice little long line written about it, but basically it's
yeah
a fighter challenges to be regional champion of kickboxing, but first he has to defeat the physical manifestation of his fear. So as the story plays out, it's going to take place entirely in the ring, or almost entirely in the ring. I think there might be a couple scenes as he's warming up in the locker room or something. I think I'm going to tell it entirely through Thought Bubble. I'm not sure yet. It's going to be all about his internal struggle and his
okay
fight and his dealing with his
yeah
fears and how he wins. And the ghost of his fear is going to make an appearance in the ring. He's going to have to fight the ghost of his fear too.
okay, that sounds great. And I'm not going to ask you when those going to
Oh
be
God, who knows?
ready to read, because I
My son might be
understand
graduating by then.
because who knows because who knows with when you do get around to doing it, are you going to be taking time off of work to write those, or is it going to be a project that you're going to have to kind of work on the weekends? Because that's a really
Mm,
interesting question. When I've put that to people have said, well, no, actually I'm a freelance graphic designer, and I've just saved up money for like a month where I can just spend a month working
mm.
on this, because I can't, because I'm doing a creative job already. I just find if I try and do my own creative work, everything
Okay.
kind of suffers.
So I think I'll be doing a little bit here and there for a while as I sort of get my head around it and get my head around my life as well. And then there will be definite moments where I take like a solid week to do something. What's quite nice
Yeah,
about being an academic is we get great amounts of holiday. So I get 2 months a year off. So yeah,
yeah.
there's plenty of time that I can fit into to really make that happen.
Mentioning your academic work, are you doing any research
No, not
at the
well, a little
moment,
bit.
or
So one thing that's quite cool is all of my team that I work with are all games designers and love making cool, weird, creative stuff. So we do practical research. So we make crazy games and then try to get people to play them and see what happens. So we're
oh,
doing
okay,
one which is a collaboration with the literature department. So we're building a life-size board game that we're going to install in a church in Kent near Canterbury, and it's called "Save Kent from Dracula." So it's like weaving Gothic literature,
sorry, that's a great title.
Gothic literature in, and the board game's life size. You've got to carry objects around the game and defeat Dracula, and there's a traitor within your group and stuff like that. We're building another game. It's going to be an arcade cabinet for 4 players. I think it's called the Nautilus is the working title. And you're Captain Ahab from Moby Dick, and you've stolen the submarine from 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and you're trying to chase Moby Dick down with it. And so it's for 4 players. So each player controls a certain part of the ship and can see their controls. So, like for example, one controls the gun, but then that they're trying to kill Moby Dick with. But then another player can see where you're steering and can see where Moby Dick is. But can't see the gun. So you got to shout and communicate to each other. We're building it with a whole steampunk aesthetic. We're going to mail that at the Canterbury Festival.
Oh, that sounds absolutely fantastic. John, can you please let people know where they can find you on the internet, social media?
Yeah, sure.
And
So
all that
best
good
places to
stuff?
find me would probably be Instagram. You can see some of the artwork I'm posting up. So that's at Jon Schwo, at JONSCHWO, or my website is www.jonschwochert.com. And if you think you're thinking about studying game design, Canterbury is a great place to do it.
And thank you very much, John. So just leaves me to say thank you guys for all the support that you've been giving us. I've done an open call out for comic books creators to kind of get in touch with me if they want their comic books reviewed. I've had a massive response to that, so I'm just going through the replies for that at the moment. Please bear with me and be patient. Please support the podcast by subscribing and leaving a rating and review wherever you are listening to this on. And yeah, so hopefully we're kind of going to start getting back into the swing of things with comic book reviews. That's it, guys. Thank you so much, and bye. Say bye, John.
All right, see y'all later.
Bye.